So good morning, everybody. I'm Harry Harding, and it's my great pleasure and honor to be able to participate in this important meeting. For both Shirley Lynn and myself, this is our first visit to Oslo and to Norway, and I'll simply tell you it's not going to be our last. We've been extremely impressed by everything we have seen and heard, and I know we'll be equally impressed by what will happen over the course of the morning. What I want to do today is to introduce you to someone that you may not have heard of, but one that actually, as you'll see, has a connection with Norway. His name was Norman Angell, and he was one of Britain's leading public intellectuals. He was an anti-war activist, he was a journalist, and he was an author. He wrote a very famous book that is the basis of our topic today. It's called The Great Illusion. It was written in several stages, published, there are several different publication dates because there were several different publications. But basically the book was published in the early 20th century, around 1910, 1911. His book was called The Great Illusion, and the illusion he was referring to was the assumption that by military preparation, war would be deterred. There would be no further major wars among major powers on the continent, and that the cost and risk of preparing for war would be prohibitive. It was a very optimistic conclusion, but unfortunately, as you can gather, the book was published only a few years before the impossible actually happened, and that was the breakout of World War I. Very rarely has an intellectual been discredited so rapidly by the failure of his confident forecasts. But on the other hand, I can think of very few people who were able to fail upward as spectacularly as Norman Angell was. And here you'll see is the connection with Norway. He continued to hold office in the British Parliament, representing the Labour Party. He was almost immediately knighted, was given the highest knight status in the British honors system. And then he was, here in Norway, awarded one of the first Nobel Peace Prizes for writing the book that made such a spectacularly wrong prediction. Now, why was he so successful despite his seeming failure? And that's because his argument was very powerful. Even though in detail it was wrong, he founded, in a way, the most important school of international relations theory that has extended down to the present day. And that is a school of theory called international liberalism, or liberal internationalism, different versions of it. And this also argued that war could be prevented by various kinds of international institutions, norms, and values and relationships. And right now, we are unfortunately, under the Trump administration in particular, going through what, as the title of our talks indicates, the great disillusionment. That is, there is growing skepticism and rejection of that school of thought that Norman Angell pioneered and supported, fostered throughout his life. So let me say a few words about that and discuss the evolution of US-China relations, which was rooted so much in that idea of liberal internationalism, what went wrong, and why we are now in a more conservative, realist viewpoint that thinks that military preparations and trade wars, technology wars, investment wars are not only feasible, but actually necessary. So basically, as you may remember, the US-China relationship began to be normalized with the visit of President Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, to Beijing in the early 1980s. Everything seemed to be off to a very, very good start until the Tiananmen crisis of June 4th, 1989, where the Chinese military suppressed a large pro-democracy anti-government demonstration in the central square of Beijing, June 4th, 1989. Within the space, I would say, of a few hours, American support, political support, public support for the relationship with China collapsed, going down from a 75% positive view of China to a 25% positive view of China. I would say basically that fast, overnight, although obviously the polls took a few weeks to reflect that. The relationship remained frozen for several years, but as a result of several crises in the Taiwan Strait, something we'll be talking about more and has been in the news very much recently, the two countries realized that there might be the possibility of a war between them unless they took steps to try to put the relationship on a more stable footing. The way to do so was actually to return to some of the assumptions of Norman Angell. And perhaps no one put a revised version of that better than President Nixon did. I heard him on several occasions give pretty much the same speech, very typical Nixon delivery, extremely well thought through, extremely well delivered, very, very thoughtful. And the most memorable line, and I heard him say it twice, different occasions, was the following. He said, "What brought the two of us together was a common enemy, the Soviet Union, and the threat it posed to the Asia-Pacific region. What will keep us together are the natural economic complementarities between the world's largest developed country and the world's largest developing country." And that was very much the echo of Norman Angell. But other aspects of the American policy towards China, which became known as engagement, were other elements of that liberal internationalist theory of international relations. In addition to building the interdependent economic relationship that Nixon referred to, there would also be the idea that China would be welcomed into the international order of norms and institutions, and would basically ask to be not simply a member of those norms and institutions, but a responsible stakeholder, as one major speech by an American Deputy Secretary of State put it. In other words, responsible for maintaining, preserving, and upholding that international order. That was believed to be extremely feasible. There would also be, in addition to the close economic interdependence between the two countries that Nixon talked about, a growing social, societal interdependence, the exchange of students and scholars, intermarriage between Americans and Chinese, cultural exchanges, scientific exchanges and cooperation, and so forth. And that's what would provide greater stability to the relationship. Also important was the idea that the leaders of the two countries, even at the very highest levels, would be able to form friendly, close personal relations of mutual understanding, respect, and even affection. And that there would be agreement on what I like to call aspirational formulas for the future of the relationship, the most famous of which was one that was announced by then President Bill Clinton and his counterpart, President Jiang Zemin of China. That would be that the two countries would form a constructive strategic partnership for the 21st century. Now, although things got off to a good start, every one of these formulas and ideas proved to be overly optimistic. And in retrospect, many would say that they were naive, just as Norman Angell had been naive in presenting his view of a liberal, international, peaceful world. The trade relationship with China quickly produced a Chinese trade surplus with the United States, something that very few economists had predicted, that China would be able to use American investment to begin to produce at great volume and great profit for China a variety of consumer goods for the United States that would move them into the United States at high quality and low prices. So by the mid-1980s, China was beginning to run this chronic trade surplus with the United States, when most economists had expected that it would be running a trade deficit, importing far more from the United States in terms of advanced technology than it actually did. No one really forecast the way in which American private investment in China would make that possible, that American businesses would export to China, as part of their investment, their advanced technology, their access to markets, their trademarks, their designs, their marketing networks, and this would enable China to surge ahead in terms of the export of low-price but high-quality consumer goods. The presidential leadership connection also proved disappointing. President after president, perhaps with the single exception of Bill Clinton and Jiang Zemin, two natural politicians, although in very different systems, who were able to get along extremely well. With that exception, most American presidents found their Chinese counterparts to be carefully scripted, reading off of note cards rather than engaging in a personal and candid conversation. And many of the American presidents were very, very disappointed in what they regarded as a lack of candor. The idea that China would be a peaceful upholder of the international order as its power increased was also disappointed, as China began to express quite ambitious territorial claims in the South China Seas, in Taiwan, and a demand for greater influence and even control in other parts of the region as well. So by the early 21st century, especially by around 2015, maybe only a couple of centuries after, or 1 century or so after Norman Angell wrote his book, there began to be a disillusionment and a claim that it was not working out. And the United States would have to change to a more realist, that's the other side of this coin of international relations ideas, towards basically a conservative realist view of China as a rising power that would have to be, if not contained, at least it would have to be counterbalanced. This caused a great debate. There were those who still believed in liberal internationalism and in the policies known as engagement. And that debate had to be resolved. There were many competing views about whether the engagement model could be rehabilitated, restored, revitalized in some way. Much was tried without much success. So ultimately, the presidential election of 2016, which brought Donald Trump to power for his first term, resolved that issue. Though Trump was not too clear at first about what the alternative would be. Indeed, at first, he actually tried to resurrect engagement. He tried to form a close personal relationship with Xi Jinping, inviting Xi and his wife to join him for discussions at his resort in Florida, known as Mar-a-Lago. He declared that, as he said, in a kind of New York way of speaking, of course, I got absolutely nothing from him, nothing, but we're going to be great friends. And that idea that Trump in particular was very skilled at building friendly relationship, perhaps especially with people of a more dictatorial leadership style, whether it was Xi Jinping or whether it was Kim Jong-un, or whether it would be Vladimir Putin. Trump would have the magic sauce that would create a very pragmatic and bargain-based relationship, and he'd be able to do this with Xi. They had a negotiation back to engagement to have an interim trade agreement. And that was announced in 2019, but was never fully implemented. So the critics began to go into full dudgeon against about how China was cheating, was not following its agreements, was not meeting the rules and regulations of the world order. And Trump decided that the solution was to go on the offensive, and that, as he put it, trade wars are easy to fight and easy to win. Why easy to fight? That's clear enough, because tariffs are not set in American law. They are basically set by an administration, whether it's through negotiations with trading partners or just unilaterally by the United States. So the Trump administration could change the tariff level with China to any level it wanted, any time it wanted. The only constraint would be if, say, rebellion, very, very serious criticism from the Congress or from the public, which did not happen much during his first term. Easy to win because Trump felt that, and he loves this term, he's used it with Volodymyr Zelensky, as you know, how many cards does the other side have? Who has the most power in that relationship? And he was confident it was the United States. And that therefore imposing higher tariffs on China would basically be worth whatever price the United States would pay, which Trump also argued would not be very much, because the price would be paid not by American consumers, but somehow by the Chinese. He may have been anticipating the subsidies that the Chinese government did actually pay to Chinese businesses that were seeing their exports to the United States decline because of the tariffs that the U.S. imposed. But Trump has had this consistent view that China was cheating in its relationship with the United States, was violating the terms of the WTO and the concepts of free trade, and the United States would be able to overcome that by putting pressure on China by the use of tariffs. Interestingly, even if this may have been controversial in some quarters, it was a policy that the other party, the Democratic Party under Joe Biden, not only continued but greatly expanded and escalated, showing that it was widely popular in the United States. And of course, the Biden administration made it not only a trade war, a tariff war, but increasingly an investment war, a technology war, basically extending it to more and more sectors of the commercial and societal relations between China and the United States. Now, this policy was announced in an interesting way. And it was written up in an article that was written by a team consisting of Trump's first national security advisor, the retired General H.R. McMaster, and his first secretary of, I shouldn't say secretary, the chair of the National Economic Council, Steve Cohen. The title was, "America First Does Not Mean America Alone." Not only was that a very optimistic view of the reaction of the rest of the world, especially American partners and friends, to the growing use of tariffs and restrictions, but also it also was the sense that the United States would be able to obtain acceptance and compliance from those, and the United States would get a fair amount of support from those trading partners and other friends. That, of course, has been disappointed, especially now in the Trump administration. And the United States is widely accused of bullying other countries, including friends and neighbors with as long a positive relationship, to give one, probably the most dramatic example, of Canada, and was uncertain and probably failed to predict the extent to which those friends and allies, at least many of them, would be so offended and angered that they would actually fight back. Which I don't think the Trump administration expected at all. So my point today is that the idea that there could be a liberal international order that would create the necessity and the possibility of peace went through great disillusionment during the Trump administration. And the United States, I think, has been isolating itself as a result of the general reaction to it. The question that you may ask going forward, and I think it's too early to make a firm prediction about this, is whether there will be a great disillusion with this new international model, which some would call conservative realism or even isolationism, mercantilism by the United States, that is being echoed by an increasing number of countries. It simply depends, I think, on how great the damage is to individual economies and to the world economy as a whole. And that calculation is still being made. But certainly there is a possibility that there will be two periods of disillusionment. The first one against liberalism, and now a second period of disillusion with its most natural alternative, and that is realism, mercantilism, containment, isolation, and all the other characteristics of the Trump administration. So that's my argument for you today. I'm now going to turn it over to my co-speaker, Shirley Lin, who will answer some of these questions, and especially how the Trump tariffs and foreign policy are being reviewed and received and opposed in that part of the world where we spend most of our time and know the best, and that is the Asia-Pacific region. So I'll turn it over to Shirley, but first, thank you for your attention, and above all, for the opportunity to be here in Norway.
You can leave it. Okay, yeah, he's going to come take you.